I'll commence by stating that the government's organised crime legislation is well and truly on track to be introduced in the very early part of the sittings next year. I understand from news reports from your good selves that some of the outlaw motorcycle gangs that this legislation will be directed at have banded together, have obtained representation and are seeking to oppose that legislation when it hits Parliament. You no doubt have some questions about that.
Well, what's your reaction, Christian? Are they just a bunch of good old boys who are unfairly targeted by nasty government types?
Yeah, look, I don't think that they're just decent people who've fallen in with the wrong crowd. And the point about the legislation that we'll be introducing to Parliament is that it is directed squarely at organised criminal gangs and their activities. It's meant to disrupt them and eventually to break them up. And it begs the question, why are these groups the groups who are so keen to spend enormous amounts of money opposing this legislation? And we would say that is because they are precisely the organised criminal activity that the legislation is designed to target. I'd expect that they will throw everything they have at us, a lot of money, a lot of legal representation. We are absolutely indifferent to that. We will push ahead with the legislation. The reason they're scared about it is because it targets organised criminal activity, and that's what these organisations do.
Do you find it ironic that these guys have actually banded together in response to these laws?
Well, it's exactly what I would have expected. I mean, it's not Rotary clubs banding together to fight these laws, not the Boy Scouts banding together to fight these laws. The people who are banding together to fight the laws are the people who have the most to lose, and that is organisations who routinely and regularly through their membership involve themselves in criminal activity. That's who these laws are directed squarely at. No surprises here, and we will make sure that it makes no difference whatsoever to our pushing ahead with this legislation.
They put out a release saying that curtail the movements of other groups such as the West Coast Eagles and the Catholic Church. Is that complete fabrication?
Yeah, well look, I've been in Parliament for 18 months now, and that's probably the stupidest thing I've heard, and that's saying something.
Can you guarantee that ordinary members of the public won't be caught up in it?
Of course. I mean, what's going to have to happen here is a prosecutor in front of a judge is going to have to prove to that judge's satisfaction that the organisation that they've identified has membership which collectively and individually repetitiously involves in criminal activity. Now, the Eagles have had a problem here and there, but there's no way on earth that they're going to fit that definition. I mean, this is designed squarely for the types of gangs that we have seen operating in this jurisdiction, and gangs who want to come to this jurisdiction. And bikie gangs, they are the top of the list.
Does it have problems making these laws stick in other states? How are you going to get around that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the advantages of not being the first is you get to see the mistakes that have been made in the other states. In fact, I've very recently received 2 separate pieces of advice that we've commissioned with respect to the South Australian legislation. Based on that advice, we will tinker with our original draft, but I'm absolutely confident that we can produce a draft for Parliament next year which will withstand any appellate scrutiny.
You've come out swinging on this issue pretty hard. Have you had to do anything to increase your own personal security, or have you had any specific threats recently that may be aimed at intimidating you?
These are groups that are going to do everything they can do legally and psychologically to turn the government away from this path. That's not going to happen.
Have you had any specific
look, it probably doesn't help me or anyone else to go into any operational details of that matter, but let me just say, these organisations, they don't want this legislation. They'll do everything that they can do legally and psychologically to deter us from this path. It's not going to work.
Are you concerned about your security?
No, I'm not.
They've also put the cost of implementing this legislation at $10 million to enforce. Do you think that's correct?
Well, I don't know which accounting firm the bikies have got doing their calculations, but I think that is not something that can be verified.
They've said that they would like to meet with you.
No. I don't think they've anything sensible to say. I mean, the point about this legislation is that the government's formed a view based on all the intelligence that's been given to us through our investigative services and the police, that the membership of these organisations engages regularly and repetitiously in criminal activity. They're not the type of people that we do deals with or bargain with or are particularly interested in hearing views from, quite frankly. So meeting would be completely unproductive and not something that I'm going to enter into.
Do you think you can speak for the Premier?
I think I can safely, can't always speak for the Premier, but I think on this one I'm on fairly safe ground. There's not going to be any meetings by the government with this group. They can do what they like. They can meet as many times as they like. They can hire as many lawyers as they want. They can run any kind of litigious activity that they want. They can say what they want, but we'll be pressing ahead with this legislation, and you'll see it in the early sittings of Parliament next year.
Do you still consider it to be the toughest in Australia?
I believe it will be, and it'll be the toughest, because I think that having the benefit of seeing what hasn't worked and what has worked in the other jurisdictions will produce the best quality legislation. Well, Parliament is not always the easiest place to make those sort of predictions, so I'll stick to the time frame that we've got, which is about introduction. We'd like to see it introduced very early into the sittings next year.
Are you expecting a lot of opposition to it?
Yes, I am, and not just from the organisations that you've mentioned. I mean, the preliminary soundings that we've had from John Quigley and others in the Labor Party is that they're not necessarily in favour of this legislation. So I think that it's legislation that will be hotly and heatedly debated in Parliament, and that may take some time.